It's still happy hour with John Gaskins. This round's on me.
On the second Tuesday in June, Gateway Lounge. It just feels like that time of the year to shoot the breeze and really dig into guests who, have been here for a while, that everybody knows their name, but maybe not everybody knows their story. And they are living my dream of not working and have time to do this. So it's great to have Mike Begeman here. Everybody knows who Mike is. 399 wins. I tried to add it up as a high school basketball player and coach in South Dakota. Oh, so much work. I went to a website. That included a 70-10 record as a player at Parker High School for the legendary Gayle Hoover. He played at Augie, where he was part of a North Central Conference championship team in 1978. That's not easy to do at Augie, and we'll get into that. And then he gets into teaching and coaching, 3 different schools, 3 different levels, lots of state tournaments, 6 runs to the finals, and his last 19 years were at O'Gorman. And, of course, then there was sons Matt and Mitch, and Mitch goes on to be an incredible coach, 2-time state champion, and he played a little bit of a part, I would think, at Roosevelt, and he just resigned. Post-basketball, we know Mike from years and years, a couple decades at Sanford as a manager in public relations, vice president, and for a few years the executive chief of staff. But he's been retired for about 4 years now, and most recently dominating the Minnehaha County precinct committeeman vote at 57%. So congratulations.
You've done a lot of homework, John.
Yeah,
we're probably done now.
That took about 5 minutes. No, that's just the start. Congratulations on winning that, by the way.
Well, thank you. Yeah. It was. I'll be honest. I don't have any political aspirations, but this was just something that I kind of did on a whim, and
yes.
I learned a little bit about it, and I thought, well, I don't really want to run for anything that's going to put me in peer for 2.5 months.
Okay.
But this is another level of being involved and just kind of dovetailing on some things I did when I did work at Sanford Health, on a board with Leadership South Dakota. And so this is kind of just a precinct committee man. I'll represent my voting base in precinct 0316. I had to learn that. But anyway, I'll be headed out to Rapid City in a couple of weeks as a delegate to the state convention, and we're going to have to vote on an attorney general, state senator, South Dakota, or treasurer, I should say. So there are some things that come along with that. Yeah. So I get to take another trip to Rapid City.
Okay, not bad. If you can dovetail that into, for me, the Alex Johnson Hotel, the Vertex Sky Bar, some Black Hills things. Now we're talking.
Great place.
Make a Black Hills trip out of it. Well, cheers. We'll do that.
Cheers.
Congratulations on all your success. I'm so happy you've been getting to enjoy retirement years. And before I forget, it is happy hour. You're a first-time guest. So happy hour drink of choice. When you were working, the end of a long workday, the end of a long round of golf, you have one choice rest of your life, one time. Any drink, what would you go with?
I'm pretty low-key. It's just usually a Miller Lite.
Okay.
And that's kind of my drink of choice. And being from Parker and small town South Dakota, sometimes you throw a little tomato juice in there. So
yes.
That's kind of what do they call that? South Dakota cocktail or whatever.
Oh, it's what do we call this?
Beer Bloody Mary.
A beer Bloody Mary. That's one.
Like
Chelada?
That. Yeah, something like that.
Okay. Bud Light now makes them in a can. They stir it up.
Yeah.
That's your next thing. Get Miller Lite to do that.
Yeah.
You're pretty good at getting people to do things.
Well,
so maybe that's your next venture.
You never know.
Miller Lite's the light beer, the domestic light beer I like to refer to as the domestic light beer that tastes like beer, that has a little beer in it. So it feels like very much there's people who love it, and that's the only one of those they will drink, or that's the only one they won't have.
Yep.
So some of us acquire different tastes than others.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. It's good to be able to do happy hour anytime.
Yeah. So besides winning the precinct committeeman election, how are you? We were talking about this just before we went on. How do you spend your days now?
That's a really good question. Summertime's easy. I can find things to do. I like to work out. I have a couple coffee groups that I am part of, and so I do that a couple days a week. And then I'm also still on a couple of boards, the Sioux Falls Park and Rec Board. We have a couple meetings a month, and so it just kind of keeps me connected, and I have enjoyed that immensely. And then I'm also on the board of the South Dakota High School Basketball Hall of Fame, and so we meet quarterly. So I just got enough stuff to kind of keep me. Okay, what do I have to do this week, or what do I need to prepare for in the next couple of weeks? So you don't want to have a lot when you're retired, but you do have to have something to kind of keep you getting up and just saying, hey, I gotta do something here. And it does help a lot when you can get up and say, okay, I've got to accomplish these 3 things today.
Sure.
So I do enjoy that. And when it comes to the summertime, playing golf, I think I mentioned I probably play 3, maybe 4 days a week, and then I love to practice, believe it or not. I don't know why. I like to be out there hitting balls and working on some aspect of the swing, which hasn't really helped. Sometimes I think it helps, but it's really been I've always liked to practice, whether it be basketball, whatever sport I was doing. But I've always told people golf might be the hardest sport I've ever tried to be good at. Because one day you think you got it all figured out, the next day it's like, where did my swing go?
You're telling me.
Yeah,
all the time.
It's one of those. It's a sport that's very, very difficult.
Or one thing is struggling. You can't hit a fairway off the tee, and then you solve that, and then all of a sudden you have the yips. Just one thing comes, one thing goes, and you never know. And for me, as someone who golfs a couple times a week, but rarely practices and hits balls, partly because I am working and I don't want to spend a lot of free time practicing.
Right.
I'll go out and play it. I'll live with the results. But another reason why I don't love practicing is how do I know? It's fun to see if you can work that kink out, right?
Yep.
Where if you hit a few balls or several or a couple dozen, and then you find that one, you're like, I think I got something here.
Right.
That's fun. But sometimes I wonder if I'm wasting time, if I'm ingraining bad habits because I don't have somebody instructing me. So,
it's a maddening game. I watch some YouTube videos, but frankly, I've kind of gotten away from that because it's more confusing than it helps. So I'm a self-taught player, and so whatever I have, whatever day it is, it's what I play with, and whether it's some days I putt okay, some days it's like putting's not there, but I usually can hit it pretty straight. I can't beat my boys anymore. Matt and Mitch have outdistanced me, but every once in a while I get just close enough to kind of scare them. But it's fun. We get to play together on the weekends.
You do, okay.
That's just a blessing for me. We're when you get to play golf with your kids, the one thing you can do anymore is golf with your boys. There really aren't very many sports I can do with my kids, but that's one of them.
Matt and Mitch, any other kids?
Those were the 2 boys, and now we have four grandkids. They each have 2. Matt and his wife Monica have 2 boys, Mason and Maverick, and Mitch and Katie have Berkeley and Brock. So and they all live here, so it keeps my wife happy, and it's one of the reasons we don't get too far away from home. We're chasing grandkids and doing that stuff.
I mean, that's so you're just living the life, and you've been doing it for a few years now, because you seem like you could be the type who I'm sure Sanford would have been happy to have you for as long as they could. You see so many people now. I don't know if it's more of a trend now, or you could tell me that you see more guys and women in the 70s, 80s. They just keep going. They just feel like they think they'd be bored in retirement. They want to have something to contribute full time, not just these things and that things like you. But obviously you didn't come to that point. It feels like you have the nice mix, and you've seen it on the other side now, and it appears you've enjoyed it, and you feel pretty happy with, cash the chips in, let's enjoy life.
That's something, John. I think you have to be ready for retirement, and I didn't know for sure if I was ready for that, but I did know that this is going to be my next iteration of whatever my life's going to be, and I just decided, hey, this is a good time to do it. I'm going to explore some things, but I don't know if retirement always turns out just the way that you are going to plan it.
Sure.
And I'm fortunate because my kids are in town. My wife loves it here. We have friends. We play pickleball. That's the other thing I do to keep myself busy. My wife plays about 4 or 5 days a week.
Yeah.
I not so much in the summer, but wintertime that takes up a lot of the time. But I've got friends that retired early out of education because they have a rule of 85 where you can retire at 55 and try to see if you want to do something else. A couple of my friends failed at that, and they went back and, like you said, they decided, I've got to do something else. There's just not enough to do. And so there's that part of it. But the last 4 years have been really fun. I've really enjoyed it, and I'll be honest, Mitch coaching and having the grandkids around, but I loved going to workouts. I did some of that in the off season, in the summertime and in the fall for kids that, not just Roosevelt kids, but kids that were, wanting to work out at Impact. I worked out a deal with Chad White, who's the owner of that facility, and he allowed me to come in and work out with kids in the fall. So I still enjoy that, and it's something that maybe I'll continue to do. I'll see. I mean, I haven't gotten any plans for that right now, but just being around the game has always been something I've really liked. And I'll be honest with you, I think I liked it better when I wasn't coaching. Years later, when Mitch started coaching, I probably liked being in the gym better than I did when I was coaching myself.
Why is that?
That's a good question. I really enjoyed the process. Working with kids and helping them to get better, working on their shot, working on their ball handling. I always thought, in basketball, and I would tell parents this over the years, you don't have to play 100 games in the summer. There are opportunities with your coaches now that they can work with you in the off season, and many of them do. They do open gyms, they have camps, and that's where you get better. Now, I'm not saying anything against games because a lot of kids do it. My kids traveled and did that, but
Same here.
The thing that you have to realize, if you're going to be a basketball player, you have to be able to dribble, you have to be able to shoot, and you have to be able to handle the ball. And being able to now work in space, learning how to play the game in a 5-on-5 scenario, I always felt it was better to do 3-on-3 or even small-sided games, working so you understand how to move, how to catch, how to space, all that stuff. But
when our 3 kids, all of them were doing summer clubs, some traveled more than others, and some seasons a lot of stuff was around here, but there was always stuff at least on the weekends. And all these club games, they're just playing a lot, barely practice, and I would think, are they getting better? I don't know if they're getting better. I'm glad they like to play. I'm glad they're keeping in shape. I don't know if they're getting any better. Yep. So I love how you feel that way. And plus, how old were you when you decided to hang it up as a head coach?
I think I was 48.
Late 40s.
So,
I ask because that's somewhere in between where, for now, your son he's 38 now?
Yep.
10 great years, and we had that conversation with Mitch, and I encourage anybody to go back and Google it, Happy Hour with Mitch Begeman. It was right here, and he talked all about his decision to step down and all the great years he had. But so he was very young. And then, how long did Gayle Hoover coach for? The guy you played for, like into his 70s at least?
Close.
I mean,
I think he was just short of maybe being about 70 years old.
Okay.
But I have coffee with him once a month at least, and we still talk about basketball games.
Sure.
And things that are with the game now versus back then.
And I want to get into that.
Yeah. So he won over 500 and some games. I can't remember how old he was. He was probably, close to retirement age, 60 to 65, right in there.
Okay. But you came kind of right in the middle of all this in your late 40s, and it was for a very intentional reason. It sounded like you'd told me earlier that you'd planned on. You had told O'Gorman, I've got 3 more years once Mitch graduates, no matter what happens, I'm done. Now that that's 20 years in the rearview mirror, has there ever been a part of you that felt like there was meat on the bone? Like, I wish I would have done it longer.
Yeah, and it's a good question. Really, John, I don't think so.
Because you're 26 years head coach, by the way, right?
I was 26
head
years.
Coach,
I'd done it a long time, and I loved it. O'Gorman was a great place to be. It was a great place to have my kids grow up, go to school, play. Not very many guys get to coach their kids.
Yeah.
And it was a great place for me to be able to do that. I'll never forget, I was at a coaching clinic years before they ever got even close to high school. But Larry Luchins and I were sitting at a coaching clinic, and he had coached Lance, and I think Lance was just getting ready to start at Northern in his college career. So I asked Larry, I said, any regrets ever coaching your own son? He says, not one bit. He said, it probably kept me in it a few more years. And I'll never forget that, because Larry was a good friend and a really good coach, obviously. But when he said that, because I did wonder whether or not it would be good for my kids to play for their dad.
Yeah.
And once he said that, I thought, okay, I'm gonna do this, because there's always times during the course of your career, whether you're in business or you're in education, you always start looking at what am I going to do. I always looked at my work life as every 5 years, okay, where do I want to be in 5 years? What do I want to be doing in 5 years? And so I kind of always have adhered to that. And I love coaching. So I did decide to start getting my degree to be a counselor principal. So I knew at some point I had to leave education, O'Gorman probably, and get back into the public school, because I wanted to get 20 years back in the public school system so I could get to teacher retirement, which is a really good thing. If you can hang in there and get your 30 years in or whatever in public education, you can retire, and it's a really good system. I couldn't do that at OG because private schools were not allowed, or they weren't in the South Dakota retirement. So that was my motivation. And so I told him, I said, hey, I'm going to leave. I'm going to be done. And I thought I was going to go be a principal, maybe a superintendent, back in a smaller school. Well, that Sanford Sioux Valley job kind of got in my way, and it was a good move, and I never looked back from there. So still got to go to games, still got to watch my son coach, so it was a good move.
Okay. How did that come about? Because that was obviously not a move you were expecting. And Sanford, for those who are newer to Sioux Falls, Sanford used to be called Sioux Valley, and then it was business, corporations, a lot of things happened. But how did this opportunity to be a manager of public relations at Sioux Valley Medical Clinic come about? That changed, obviously, your professional life.
It did. And I'll be honest with you, I was very hesitant to make that move, as I thought, what am I going to do working for a health system? And the gentleman that ended up hiring me, Ray Trankel, and another gentleman that worked at Sioux Valley at the time, Dick Bowie, who just recently passed away. And those two guys were instrumental in helping me to kind of understand, okay, this is what you can do. Your skill set, you're not a healthcare person, but your skill set is such that we need people to be able to go out and talk about the benefits of being an integrated health system, which Sanford or Sioux Valley were at the time. They had clinics, hospitals, insurance, the whole thing. And so what my role was going to basically go out into the communities where we had a clinic presence or a hospital, a Lewis Drug, for example,
all over
the
South Dakota,
place.
Southwest Minnesota, Northwest
Exactly.
Iowa.
So that was my first role, and I traveled, put a lot of miles. I had an old two-door Chrysler, and it got a lot of miles on it, but that's what I did. It was like teaching, but first of all, I had to learn about healthcare, and that was probably the most frightening thing, because you step out of your box. I was a teacher. I taught about everything you can imagine, from algebra to social studies, psychology, whatever. But now stepping into a world where I had to go and learn about, health insurance, or I had to learn about what an integrated health system was, how to explain that, because these aren't 15 and 16-year-old kids that I'm talking to. I was talking now to adults who were business owners and people that were pretty sharp in terms of, okay, we want to know, ask me questions or whatnot. So that was what I did, and I had to sharpen up my skills and my base of understanding before I could ever go out and talk to a group of people. But I loved it. It was fun. I got to meet a lot of people, and I would basically recruit my own boards of people in places like Winter, Chamberlain, Worthington, all different places, Laverne. And so and I like to talk to people, which you could probably already imagine. So it just fit, and it was a really good role. I loved it. And for about 3 years while I did that role, I was still coaching. And so I think Matt was a senior, Mitch was a freshman or sophomore, and so I coached those guys through their last few years, and that was, then I went full-time with the hospital.
Okay.
So it was good.
And never looked back. By the way, did you like teaching?
I did.
Because
I'll be honest.
Because some coaches don't, and some coaches love it, and some coaches are AP, chemistry, or English teachers, and some are like, no, I really, I'm not going to name names, but there are some who just hated it. Yeah.
I think to answer that the best way, I got bored teaching. I'll be totally honest with you. I was bored, and I think, to be honest, John, I was looking for something else to kind of fulfill me a little bit, if you will. And the only way that at the time, the only way you could coach was you had to teach. Yeah. And so, having said all of that, I was able to still teach or coach for 3 years while I worked in another. And I think I was the first coach that ever did that in Sioux Falls. There were a couple other ones after me. Robin Burgard, if you ever, Robin coached at Lincoln. Yeah. And I think even Jeff Halseth might have did it for a couple years, but I think Lyle Pearson maybe. But, at the time, they were reluctant to let anyone just coach and not be in the school system, which I totally understood. But Tom Lorang and Steve Keeter, and at the time Kelby Kravinoff, my boss, said, yeah, why don't you do that? And so I did. And I was very blessed to be able to do that.
Now, it's interesting. Your son Mitch, talked about leaving, and he's off to. It's a new company. What's the company again?
MRG Hoff.
MRG Hoff, which is it's a printing, sports printing, and gear, apparel. Thank you.
Yep.
All over, it's a big company, a merge of different companies, and so he's going to kind of represent them. It sounds like do some of the kind of things you did. Drive around, talk to people, represent a brand, but he said I don't know if Roosevelt offered him to stay on without teaching, but he said he did not want to keep coaching if he wasn't teaching. So, he doesn't believe that. He believes in this day and age, and I don't know if it's different from 20 or 30 or 40 years ago or not, that he just feels like that's partly what the role of a coach should be, a guy that's available during the school hours for their players, I guess. Yeah. What was that like for you, transitioning from a guy that was there every day to now you're basically only there for practices and games?
Yeah, it was, I'll be honest, it was a great way to coach. And I had the advantage that I probably had at the time was, all the kids that I was going to be coaching for the next 3 years spent time at my house. They were Mitch's buddies and Matt's friends, and their parents. I knew them all. And so it wasn't really a hard transition. And the best thing about it, John, is I'd do my job. I'd probably leave my work, depending upon, probably leave about 2 o'clock, go to the gym, get ready for practice, and I got to see the kids in school, the ones that I wanted to see, the ones that I was coaching. And not that I didn't like the other ones, because there were some delightful kids, don't get me wrong. But I got to work with the kids every day that I really enjoyed being around. Yeah. And it was a great way to coach. The only problem, and I think Mitch realized this too, is when you are out of the building, it's hard to keep kids accountable. And especially in this day and age, they want to see you in the hallway. They need to see that the coach is there. And if they get in trouble, you're kind of like a surrogate parent. If you get in trouble in the classroom, those teachers, they kind of, they want to let, and Mitch wanted that. I'll never forget, the teachers, they would have an open door. Hey, so-and-so didn't get to class this morning, or so-and-so was late. Trust me, they were in more trouble when they got to his practice than they probably were when they were in the classroom. Yeah. And that was important, and that's the one thing I really, Mitch did a great job coaching. He was a good coach, really good coach. But I think the preparation and his ability to hold kids accountable, they really respected that. And I think that was important for him to establish that relationship, not just with the kids, but with the entirety of the other teachers in the building. And I think that's why that's important.
Had to make you proud.
Very proud.
That part
Yep.
of it. I know the wins and the state championships.
Yeah,
made
that's
you
all
proud,
great.
but-
That's all.
Yeah.
On both my sons, I'm blessed. Thank God they take after their mother because, Matt and Mitch, I think are. I always tell people they're better versions of what I was as a parent, and they're good parents. They're great to their kids. They, do the right things, and I don't know how they do it, but sometimes I must have said something right, or their mom and I together, hopefully raise them the right way.
I'm guessing so. Well, let's walk that back to how you grew up. But were you born and raised in Parker whole time?
I was born and raised on a farm north of Parker.
Okay.
And it was a great way to grow up. You don't know any better. I mean, I grew up with 3 siblings, a brother, 2 brothers, and a sister, and so we were both about in the same vintage. But I went to Monroe Grade School, which closed quickly after I was probably a second grader and it closed. So then I had to go to a rural school, a country school. So I'm one of the last surviving people that actually went to a country school, a 1-room schoolhouse. So that was for about 1 year.
Wow, that's like from, what is it, Little House on the Prairie?
Oh, it was. And when I tell people that, because that wasn't going on. But what was going on during that time was consolidation of schools, and from Parker to Marion to Canastota to Humboldt, Hartford. All of those smaller towns were going through reorganization, and where my farm was right on the kind of on the boundary between what would become West Central and Parker. And my dad went to Parker High School, played football, loved to play, but didn't play basketball. But anyway, when it came time for us to choose our school, they chose Parker. And so that's how I ended up going to Parker instead of to West Central. Was where I ended up coaching about 20-some years later.
Yeah, no kidding.
Which is another story. But anyway, I was very fortunate. Gayle Hoover was at Parker, and I think that was one of the reasons my dad, because he knew I liked sports, and I don't know if I was old enough to really play much basketball at 3rd grade, but I really liked it. And Parker had a reputation of having good teams, and obviously the coach was one of the best coaches ever in the state, and so that's where I ended up.
So was Gayle the high school coach when you were like in grade school?
Oh, yeah.
So he was already the guy. And was he already well established?
Pretty much. He came there, and I think right after I was born. And so when we have coffee, I always remind him that you started coaching in 1957 was when I was born. Yeah. And I think he came to Parker in 59.
Wow.
And so, he was already a legend by the time he got to Parker, not only as a coach, but probably more as a player. Yeah. He was the all-time leading scorer at Sioux Falls College and in the whole state of South Dakota. Anyway, he had already established himself as quite a player, and he had the utmost respect. And kids that went to Parker and played basketball, I mean, there was an expectation that, we're supposed to be good here, and they were good. They had state tournament appearances in 64, 66, and 68. And I remember watching those players, and of course you kind of idolize them when you're growing up, and that's what I wanted to do.
Yes.
So,
well, I mean, were most of these state tournaments in the Sioux Falls Arena?
Oh, yeah.
So give people, plenty of people who are watching this and have lived in Sioux Falls for a long time, followed the sports, they know exactly what Mike's talking about. Again, some younger people or those who are newer to Sioux Falls, even within the last 10 or 15 years, it's been a while. I got to call some of the last state tournaments in the old Sioux Falls Arena, but what was it like in the 60s?
Yeah, it was phenomenal. And I didn't get to attend one until, I believe, the 1969 state final. I had an uncle who was a teacher, and he had an extra ticket. And it was the final between DeSmet and Oneida that went like 3 overtimes. Okay. And Dave Thomas was there. Well, anyway, prior to that, go back to 1960, the state tournament was played in Huron. And so then they moved it to Sioux Falls to the new arena, and that became its home for a long
new
time.
Arena, the new Mecca.
Yep.
And paint the picture of what it was like in there during the games.
Yeah, it was. The first state tournament game I played in, I was a sophomore, and we opened up the tournament, first game, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had seen him on TV, but you just, as a kid, you're watching. There's a lot of people there, I think, and the Jim Burt was doing the play-by-play, and That's a name from the past if you don't remember
Total
that.
TV
but
sports guy.
Yeah, he was phenomenal.
Legend.
But anyway, I walk out on the floor or out of the locker room, and I'll never forget, there were kids sitting on the cement areas behind the backboard. There wasn't enough room for people. I think it held like 9,500 people.
And it was all bleachers, correct?
Bleachers. There were chairs. Remember the old chair backs up on top?
Okay.
So there were bleachers on the bottom and chair backs on the top, and there wasn't a place to sit.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, wow, this is like unbelievable. And so that was in 1973. That was my sophomore year, and we got into the tournament kind of we weren't so really supposed to be very good, but we kind of snuck in the back door.
Okay.
And we ended up beating a good Bottle team in the first round and got to the second game against Sioux Valley, who was led by an all-state point guard that was a really good player, Henry Langkeek. George Kiner was the coach, and they were one of the favorites. And we just came out and got after them, and we ended up winning by 20 points. And George Kiner is still a friend. He does a lot of things with his books and state track meets, has books that depict a lot of the state tournaments and a lot of just sports stuff over the years. Well, I ended up having 28 points in that game, and every time he sees me, he'll say, Begeman, you really ruined my year that year. And I said, sorry, Coach.
Yeah.
It really made our year pretty good.
Yeah.
And so those are the kind of memories. And then we played Emory in the state final, and of course, got second, which was one we should have won. But Coach Hoover and I talk about those. As hard as it was to lose those, you still have to get there. And I think that was the one thing he told me. He says, you don't ever have to define your career as a coach or a player by, how many state tournaments you win or lose or what. The fact that you played in them and you got there and you got families and kids and parents to go to the state tournament, because that was a big deal for Class B teams. They get there maybe once out of every 20, 25 years back then.
Yeah.
We were fortunate to play in a couple, and it was a huge deal for the town. There's kids and people that I still run into. Hey, I remember that game in 1974 when you guys played so-and-so. But it was a phenomenal environment, John. I get off track a little bit, but
that's okay.
It's that old environment. People don't they think even Matt and Mitch, although there was a game,
there's
the final,
footage out there.
There's footage, and the place was electric. And everybody in the state, if you were a basketball fan, you wanted to get a ticket.
Yeah, that's so awesome. By the way, because you had 2 runner-ups as a player?
2 runner-up player, yeah.
And 4 as a coach at O'Gorman. Did that attitude that Gayle brought forth to you, did that help you in any way with your processing of the 4 as a coach?
It did. And, you're always disappointed. You want to win. And I remember the first year when I was at O'Gorman and we got to the state tournament. They had not been to a state tournament since 1967. I got there in 88. And, of course, all the football championships, and Bob was still there. He was kind of on the staff as an AD. Coach Keeter was there, obviously. And everybody understood the football championship culture. But when we got to the state tournament in 1990, it was my second year there, I think. And I just remember our cheerleaders had no idea what was going to happen. We were going to be at the state tournament for 3 days. It was in Sioux Falls. And we had no idea what to do. My players, how many games we get to play? Well, we get to play 3 more games. Oh, okay. Well, and all of a sudden we got there and it was like, hey, this is pretty cool. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the kids that I started with when I got there, 3 of them were sophomores. Ryan Folsom, who coached at Sioux Falls, Washington for a while, was a sophomore. Scott Bickett, who I think he's an insurance salesman in Minneapolis. And Scott Hunter, I believe his son, Lucas, played on the Lincoln High team this year. So those 3 guys were sophomores on my first team there. And by 1990, we got to the state tournament. And it was like, this is pretty cool. Exactly.
Norman Dale said in Hoosiers.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
We're kind of bouncing back and forth, which is just okay. So Gayle was very well respected, and he was the guy that you wanted to play for. And then you get to Parker, and what kind of Head coach was he? What was his style? What was his personality? What did you like, or what was challenging about playing for him?
There was nothing challenging. He got the best out of his athletes. And I've told him this numerous times. I think coaches that can get players to even play beyond what they're capable of. I know it sounds kind of corny, but he was one of those guys that just gave you confidence because he was very prepared, and we played a certain style, and we could shoot, and we had during my time we had some really good athletes too, a couple big kids. Dale Buskell was a 6'5" post player who would have been in school with me at Monroe when it closed. Mike Lee was an all-state football player, and all three of us came from that Monroe area to Parker. And Coach Hoover was just one of those guys that you didn't want to disappoint him. And I think that's the mark of a really good coach, an excellent coach, is when you play for someone that you don't want to let down, you will do anything, run through a wall, whatever the old adages are. He was that kind of a coach, and he never yelled. You knew when he was not happy, but he never would yell, never curse. He would just always be able to get you, whether we were up or down. He was always coaching, and he wanted us to be gentlemen. He wanted us to be better people than we were players. And so we always kind of had that underlying feeling that we weren't going to disappoint Coach Hoover, and that was kind of how we grew up.
Well, knowing that you're still good friends with him and having coffee with him regularly, I'm guessing that shaped partly the way you coached. Did you take a lot of notes from that?
I did. I think anybody that coaches, you do glean some things from people you played for, and I certainly did from him. I was probably a little more emotional than he was. I was kind of like Mitch. I was up and down the sidelines. I didn't sit much, and I think I probably got after the officials a little more than Coach Hoover did and Mitch did, but that was my style. I was into the game. I wanted, coaching players. I didn't yell at them per se too much as far as getting mad at them, but just trying to motivate them. And so I was very fortunate. I had great kids at O'Gorman. I had great kids at West Central and Colman. But I did glean a lot of what I think coaching for me. I always wanted to look back. Okay, that's what Coach Hoover did. I'm going to try to do that. It was an easy one to follow, and I was fortunate to play for Mel Klein at Augie. And Mel was a little different coach than Coach Hoover, but still some things I think I gleaned from both of them.
Describe, first of all, why you decided to go to Augie. Who else were you looking at? And
I was fortunate. I had an opportunity. I could have probably gone to USD. South Dakota State was in the mix. When Jim Marking was the head coach, my junior year, he recruited me, and we were at a game. In fact, we were playing against Hamlin. The very first high school game played in Frost Arena was a prelim game to a college game, and we were playing Hamlin. So Steve Brown, who was a senior, I was a junior, we played them in the very first high school game at Frost. And
that had to have been
it was
cool.
Fun. It was very cool. That was a beautiful.
And how big of a deal was Frost Arena?
It was like the best arena in the state, other than maybe the Sioux Falls Arena, which wasn't very old, but Frost was very cool. And the crowds, I never did get to see a crowd in the old barn, as they called it, but Frost Arena was great. And Coach Marking, I remember after the game, he asked Coach Hoover if he could talk to me, and he said sure. So I talked to him. So he wanted me to come to South Dakota State the next year. Well, he leaves to go sell insurance, and I end up, getting connected with the Augie coaches, Mel Klein, John Thomas, and at the time Jack Doyle at USD. It was those two that were pretty close, and I ended up choosing Augie. And I think partly because it was close to my farm, I was still able to get back and help, and my mom and dad could still come see games. So that was an easy decision.
And it went pretty well. I mean, this is again back in the days where those three schools were actual competitors in the North Central Conference in Division II together. And so what were those battles like?
Awesome battles. I think back and playing the state games, USD games, were we would fill. That was when we played at the arena. All of our home games at Augie were at the arena too. So I think I counted one time. I think through high school and college, I probably played about 70 games in the arena, and it was a great venue for that. And we had good teams. State and USD were always pretty good. We ended up in '78 winning the North Central Conference, which was a not an easy thing to do. UND, North Dakota State, Northern Iowa, Nebraska, Omaha. There were some really good basketball schools at the time, and I actually got to play with two of the better post guys that ever played at Augie. Both of them were 6'8", 6'9", and both of them were back-to-back MVPs of the league. So you can about imagine at that time, no three-point line. We had two really good big guys. The ball went inside quite a bit. And so my role then changed, to be real honest with you. I was still a factor because once in a while teams couldn't guard our big guys, so they would play zone. Well, that allowed me to kind of do what I needed to do. And I also played with a couple of good guards. Steve Creer, who ended up being my assistant at O'Gorman, was on the same team. He was a year younger. But we played together and had some fun times and had good teams. I mean, it wasn't always easy, but we were competitive and it was fun.
So you're getting to it. I failed to mention in our intro to start this chat that you scored 1,477 points as a high schooler at Parker. And oh, by the way, this is part of the reason why this upcoming September you're going to be in the South Dakota Sports Hall of Fame. So congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Late on that one.
Thank you.
We'll get to that toward the end. You're going in as for all your accomplishments as a player and a coach. But yeah, what kind of player were you? And I'm not like how good were you, but like what was your style?
Yeah.
What made it work so well with not just individually, but obviously you're on some great teams in high school and college.
Yeah. And in high school, I was fortunate to play a long time and played 4 years. So didn't start as a freshman, but played. But then I started 3 years in high school. And I think what that allows, and there's a lot of guys like me that came through small town South Dakota that played a lot of basketball, played in some big games, and so you kind of get prepared to play in front of crowds. You have the ball in your hands when it counts, all that stuff. And when I went to Augie, I was a shooter. I played point guard, but the style of play was, a lot different than it is today. I mean, there was post players, a lot of high-low interaction with the posts, not much movement on the perimeter. And so you relied on ball movement, you relied on, getting the ball inside for the best shot because there weren't an extra point for that 20-foot jump shot. Yeah. And I shot a lot of those in high school, and I shot a lot of them in college. But it was a different style because I think the most points we ever averaged in college was probably in the mid-60s, which isn't a lot of points in a college game today. Right. I mean, they're scoring 80, 90 points. In high school, we would probably average 70 points, but we were a little more fast-paced. And so anyway, my role, I played. It was fun. I enjoyed it. I probably could have went to a smaller school and played in a similar fashion as I did in high school, but I really always had my heart set on playing at the Division II North Central Conference level. I wanted to play in the same level as the Rick Nissens, the Ron Wiblemos, the guys that played at South Dakota State, Augie, USD. That's where I wanted to be, and so that made my decision pretty easy.
And you did it, and you held your own.
Yeah, it was I always said I was 6'1". I probably was barely 6 foot, but it was a challenging. But yet, some of my best friends are still the guys I played with in college. We got to play every year. We took a trip. I'll sidetrack here. We took a trip somewhere around the country where we would play, a Division I school. One year we played Kansas State. The next year we played somebody else. Well, one year this was the year, I think I was a sophomore, and we played Butler, Valparaiso, and Indiana State. Ooh. And there was a kid that played at Indiana State that really nobody heard of at the time, but it was Larry Bird. And I think there was somebody put it on Facebook where they pulled the excerpt out of the paper. Yeah. And it was funny to this day. Mel and I have talked about this where, we didn't know who Larry Bird was. And by halftime of that game, we knew who Larry Bird was. Yeah. He was 6'9". He could do. I mean, it was like where did this guy come from?
What year was he? Do you know what year?
He would have been the same year classified as us, so he'd have been a sophomore that year.
Sophomore, okay.
So it wasn't until his junior, senior when they really started to make noise.
Yeah, and he's on the cover of Sports Illustrated and playing against Magic Johnson in the finals.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was one of those games where it was like, wow. But we played in the old Butler, the Coliseum where they filmed Hoosiers.
Yep.
And so that was pretty cool. But yeah, there were some really cool trips.
Did you play? Okay, no, you played Butler in Butler Fieldhouse. When you played Larry Bird in Indiana State, so he's known not just as one of the legendary players in NBA history, but trash talkers as well. Did he have that going on back as a sophomore at Indiana State?
You know, I don't remember a lot of it. I just remember. So I told you we had the two best players in the North Central back to back, and one of them, Arvid Kramer, got drafted in the third round by the Utah Jazz. And so by halftime, Greg Nagel was the other. He was 6'8", and Arvid, and they were both on our team at the time. They came in at halftime, and they were looking at each other and said, "You're guarding him. I'm not guarding him." Nobody wanted to guard him. And it was like, this guy is just tearing us a new one. And it didn't matter where we guarded him. It was either if he went outside, he could shoot over the top of us. He went inside, he would get a shot. I mean, I think he had like 18 points and 7 rebounds at halftime. He probably ended up with 25 or 20. I don't know, but he was just. It was unbelievable how good he was.
It was just the skill. That was
skill. And at that size. I mean, he was. People didn't realize he looks proportionately. He maybe he doesn't look real big,
right.
But our guys were 6'9" and 6'8". Well, he was at least an inch bigger than the 6'9" guy, and he was a man. He was a big guy. But that was one of the highlights.
I can't imagine how many times you must have watched Larry Bird from there on out, watched his games, especially maybe if you're at a sports bar, and I'm sure you couldn't help yourself every now and then to point out, to tell that story.
Oh, it was fun, and people didn't believe me, so I had to show them the program. I actually had a program that I kept for whatever reason from that game. But I always remember I loved watching the NBA then during the kind of that 70s, 80s, 90s run and then Jordan came along. It was a fun game to watch. And so, but it was, I think, made it more intriguing to me because there were some guys that I remember were playing at the same time that we were playing in college. And we had gotten to a regional tournament where we were one game away from going to the Final Four in Division II, and we got beat. So we were close, but we just never quite got over that hump to get to that Final Four in Springfield. I think they played it in Springfield, but a lot of the guys, there were some good players in Division II and even NAIA back then that ended up in the pros. That oh yeah, we played him or we saw him play or whatever. Those guys, Maurice Cheeks was another one.
Now. Okay,
that was another kid or another guy.
Yeah.
So he
head coach too.
Yeah.
Wow. So, man, I'm curious as a guy who's obviously a lifelong basketball nut. You're like a lot of people, my age. I'm about 20 years younger than you, but that's the NBA 80s with Magic and Larry, Michael in his early years, Isaiah Thomas and the Bad Boy Pistons, Stockton Malone. We're all nostalgic about that. We all thought that was, the cream of the crop. How do you watch that compared to today? Because I also talked to guys my age, like Chris Johnson, the coach at USF. He says it like, as far as the athleticism goes, the guys today would blow these other guys out of the water. But obviously, it's a different game, and there's a lot there for you to chew on there. Whether you like the type of basketball then versus the type now. But what are you thinking if you're comparing to that day when you watch games today, like the NBA Finals last night or whatever? Yeah.
Well, it's a great question, and I think it's one that gets hashed over a lot. But I remember when I was coaching in, early 80s into the 90s, obviously. So I was watching a lot of basketball because you want to try to pick up, not that your high school kids can do the same thing as the pros, but you might catch an out-of-bounds play. So I was watching it pretty intently, and I still watch pretty intently just to kind of see, okay, how are they playing? But I think I would agree, even in high school, the athletes right now in high school are much better physically.
Yeah.
I think because of all the athletic training components that are available to them. I don't know that they're any more skilled as far as shooting goes, but they are much more athletic. And I think going back to when you're describing, back in the 80s, there were some good athletes. I mean, you remember the Dominique Wilkins and the David Thompsons. So they were sprinkled in there. I think now you see for every one of them back in the 80s and 90s, there's 5 of those guys.
Yeah.
And they are just unbelievable, freakish athletes.
Yeah.
And now they're even bigger. And so, but I think the skill that they had back then, it was a physical game. I mean, there were guys, big physical post guys that, you came in the lane. You mentioned Detroit. I watched that documentary with Lambeer, and they wouldn't let you get a layup.
Yeah.
And so it was not an easy man's game. And now the physicality and the spacing in today's game, just watching what they do, a lot like the colleges do. Basketball is always kind of a copycat sport.
Sure.
Whatever's going on in the pros and college, everybody's going to be doing the same thing. And I think even more so now with the introduction of portal, because every year you're going to have a different group of guys. You better not be doing too much different, because that's what they've now been doing in their AAU careers, in their high school, college, whatever team they were on. You can't vary too much from the skill sets that they all have. And so now you see a much different game. There are staggered screens, there are back cuts, and the big guys are starting on the top of the floor. They'll work their way down in the post, but it's a lob and a dunk.
Yeah.
There's not very much back to the basket type play. And so that's changed completely. But I don't know. I don't know if I'm a fan or not. I don't really like today's NBA. I do watch the playoffs. I just don't like watching the regular season because I just don't think they play very hard. Now all of a sudden there's something on the line, and now it's like, everybody is getting after each other, and it's almost too physical.
Yeah, it's as somebody who kind of starts hopping on the Wolves train in February, March, especially when my basketball duties are done locally, calling games, state tournament once, and then now I've got more time to watch the Wolves.
It's right, you're a Wolves fan.
Well, I've become a Wolves fan living up here, and now they've gotten good. I mean, it was no fun to watch them when they sucked, which was most of the time. I grew up a Bulls fan before they started winning the titles, when they were kind of struggling at 500 and to break through in the playoffs in Jordan's early years. But anyway, you watch now, you can't overreact to what happens in February and March and April, even April in those NBA regular season games, because for everything you just said. But were you noticing, were you watching the game with that intent as like a college kid? Did you know you wanted to become a coach? Because I think you've mentioned you were a head coach right away.
Yeah, I was.
Right out of college.
I was, and I never was an assistant. I always thought maybe I should have been, but I was a head coach right out of school. And you kind of make your mistake. Colman, just east of Madison, just off the interstate.
Yep.
But yeah, I knew I was going to be a coach. I think after my first year of college, and it probably was somewhere between when I started taking that anatomy class or biology. I don't think I'm going to be a doctor, so I'm going to be a coach, and so I kind of migrated that direction. And but yeah, it was a good choice. If I had it to do over, I'd do the same thing. I don't think I would change a thing, just because I still love the game and I loved it then.
Yeah.
And life gets in the way, as we mentioned. I mean, this whole, guys that love coaching and do it for a long time, it's God bless them, because it's not easy. It wasn't easy back then, but it was just a different style and a different way to coach, because you didn't see the kids in the summer. I remember the day it changed in 1985. The Activities Association said, you guys can have open gyms now. You can work with your kids in the summer. And I think it was just kind of an answer to the fact that there were some coaches doing it already. And so rather than penalize them, they say, we'll open the doors to the gyms. You guys can all work with your kids. Mm-hmm. You can't scrimmage other schools or play games, but you can have your kids in the gym. Yeah. And that's when the world changed, because now you didn't get paid more for it, but there was an expectation from year to year to year. If you're not doing your work in the summer, you're probably not going to be as competitive as you should be.
Yeah.
And so that didn't bother me. I loved being in the gym, but I'll tell you what, it does have a tendency as you get into later in your years, it burns you out a little bit because now there's more going on almost in the off season there is during the season, as you know. I mean, you mentioned kids playing sports in the summer, whether it's basketball, baseball.
It feels like that's where most of the recruiting is done too.
Yeah.
I mean, these coaches can go to AAU tournaments where you got your collection of stars and coveted recruits all together. It seems like those are the more, for them in the recruiting world, the more the more important games, I guess, because you're also measuring how they're doing against other elite players. And, man, I'm sure we could talk for an hour about that. But Colman for how many years? Then West Central for how many years?
2 years at Colman and 6 years at West Central.
West Central. And you mentioned how, that was really interesting because you almost went to, or at least had a choice to go to West Central in high school. You went to Parker. I don't think those were ever big rivals, were they?
Not too much.
Playing at different levels.
Yeah, at the time West Central was Class A for a while.
Yeah.
When I was there, actually, for a couple of years, and they went back to Class B, so it never really was a rival.
Okay.
We always played each other.
Yeah.
But the funny thing about that is, I'll just make this brief. But so I'm applied for the job at West Central. Jim Utek had been the basketball coach, but he just wanted to do football. And so the job was open, and I thought, wow, I'm going to check that out. It's closer to at the time, my folks were still on the farm, and so I'd still go back and forth. And so anyway, I apply for the job. The superintendent calls me, and I go visit with him, and he says, I think we're going to offer you the job, but we got to take it to the board. And so I'm thinking, okay, so this is a weekend is passing. And I get a call on Monday from the board chair, a delightful lady, great lady. And anyway, she says, Mike, I find it really interesting that you want to be our head coach, but back in the early 70s, you didn't want to come to school here. And I'm thinking to myself, nobody told me that. I had no idea that was even going on. I do now, obviously, my dad. So I called. They offered me the job. But I called my dad and said, Dad, did we make a decision not to go to West Central when I was growing? Oh, yeah, we had to petition our farmland out of the West Central School District so we could be in Parker. That would have been nice to know maybe at the time, just so I could have responded. But it all worked out.
You got the job.
It's.
And you must, to get the job at O'Gorman, you must have had some pretty good teams at West Central.
We did, and actually Kent Colesrud, who's the girls' coach at O'Gorman, played for me for 2 years, and then he went to Dakota State. But we had some really good teams, and I left a good team. That was the hard part, going to O'Gorman. At the time, they had struggled for several years, and I had good kids coming. And I thought, well, I kind of always wanted to be a class. I wanted to be in the biggest schools. I wanted to be back in Sioux Falls, and my wife had a good job she was a business manager at West Central, and she stayed there for over 30 years. But it was easy to get back and forth. But so anyway, I finally took the job at OG, and
what pushed you over the top? Just because you wanted to coach at that level?
Yeah, okay, that was kind of it. I mean, I had actually turned it down once, but Coach Keeter was the AD, and he and I our farms were like 2 miles apart, so we grew up very close, played against each other.
He's a Hartford guy, and he went to West Central.
He went to West Central. He was an excellent athlete there. But so anyway, he talked me into it, and I ended up going, and rest is history.
And you got him rocking and rolling pretty good. Those must have been exciting times. You've mentioned getting to the state tournament for the first time in 20 years at the school. But I guess in general, to skim through all of it, how did you do it? How did you get them rolling again?
Yeah.
And obviously O'Gorman's never looked back since those days when you started coaching.
Well, I think, looking back at it, I mean, the culture, the football culture was very strong. And that didn't bother me because I think looking at it, that doesn't scare me. I think I know they have athletes. So those kids aren't just good football players because they're, I'll find some athletes. Well, you also had to kind of establish. That's why I learned a little bit about, establishing culture. It just doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time sometimes. But I found some kids that wanted to play basketball. Found some athletes that were playing football. I mentioned Ryan Folsom. Ryan was a Division I football player when he went to college, but I convinced him to play basketball. Chad McConnell was another one, really good athlete at OG, baseball player, went to play on at Creighton. So I kind of went and found some kids and said, hey, come play basketball. Come work out in the gym. Let me see you. So anyway, it started like that. I'll just tell you this. The very first open gym I had after I'd signed the contract, school was out, and I'm all excited. I'd sent my letter out to probably 50 kids that I knew were in the program. And so Monday night, I was sitting in the gym just waiting for the kids to show up. It's 6 o'clock, nobody there. 6:15, nobody there. Finally, one person walks in the gym, and I thought, okay, well, they got one guy. He was looking for the band room. So that was how my first open gym went. Nobody showed up. So I had my work cut out. But obviously, you find kids, you nurture them, you get them to buy in, and then you start having a little bit of success. And thank God for those 3 sophomores that stayed with me till we got to the state tournament. Once we got to a state tournament again, that kind of turned the corner, because in '92 we went to the final and played Jason Sutherland's team in against Watertown, and they beat us out in Rapid. But that kind of we kind of had arrived. And then the next year I had another good team, except my best player blew his knee out in the summer, so I never got to coach the best of that team. But we made it back, and Huron beat us in the semis, and then they beat Watertown. Ryan Moores is the AD at Yankton. He was on that team. Jay Elwine was on that team. His son played at Huron.
Elwine, the all-time leading scorer at Huron until Blake broke it and won the state titles.
That's the connection there. But
wow. So
Jay and I had a good visit about that. He was a really good high school player. Went to Augie, got hurt, unfortunately. Okay. But yeah, it all ties together, and I think that's the great thing about high school sports in South Dakota. Everybody has a connection. Yeah. And I'm old enough to have a lot of connections now as I go back, and really fun kind of visiting with you, just reminiscing.
I bet. Well, and I'm sure you're never lonely at state tournaments, I bet. You've got so many old friends to connect with that you played against, coached against, with, and all that stuff. It was really enjoyable to have you call a couple games there at the state tournament with us here at Midwest Sports Plus. Just a couple of the highlights and the hits. You've mentioned your first finals in '92. In '98, correct me if I'm wrong, you played a Brandon Valley team that had upset Mike Miller and Gary Munson and Mitchell. And that team you ran into Austin Hansen, correct? And he was one of the greats.
He was really good. Yeah. He was really good. That semifinal night, we played Spearfish. Spearfish was actually the 1 seed. We were the 4. Yeah. Brandon was 2 and Mitchell was 3, I believe. Yeah. And of course, Mike, everybody was just kind of, well, it's just a foregone conclusion they're going to be in the final. And lo and behold, it was Brandon's night. They beat him, and it was on a tough call. Mike fouled out late in the game, and I remember those Mitchell folks don't like to lose, and they were not happy. And so we had to play the next game, so we ended up winning, and then we ran into them in the next night. We ran into Austin and Chad Creesh and Joe Ford. Just a good group of athletes. And we played them at Brandon earlier in the year, and they beat us in overtime. So it wasn't like it was an upset. It was probably neither one of us were supposed to be in the final, to be real honest, because Spearfish was loaded. They had a really good team. I can't remember all those guys, but we played really well in the semis. And like I said, getting there is not always easy. Everybody said, oh, yeah, you got to win a final. Well, yeah, it would have been nice. It wasn't like we weren't trying. But I was always really felt good about being able to get to a final and playing good teams. And, you want to win. I coached my rear off, but, hey, it didn't happen. But, it was it was a really, really good high school basketball in AA that year, because there were some, Mike, Austin. There were Nathan Vogel, coach at Augustana, was my point guard.
Wow.
Then he went on to play at Black Hill State. There were some really good college basketball players that ended up coming out of that group of 98.
And then we just zoom ahead, around 2002 is when you were able to, hey, you're going to 3 more years, and that's going to be it. You're going to coach your sons. You walked through that, and your last 2 years, Mitch's last 2 years, you get to the final both years, not just the finals, but getting there again. What was it like to coach Mitch? What were some of those things?
Yeah, it was fun. It was really fun coaching my sons. Matt was, I look back, I always, say, were you harder on Matt than you were on Mitch? And I said, no, I think I was equally, I think what I always told him was, you don't have to be the best player, but you have to be one of the hardest workers.
Yeah.
And that was never a problem. They both worked hard. They put in the time. And the last 2 years with Mitch's teams, we were pretty good. We had Stephen Smith, who was 6'10" or 11. He was a senior when all those other guys, Jesse Clark, Mitch, and Dusty Colman, Tyler Shaw, they were all juniors.
Okay.
And so Stephen was kind of he was the focal point. And so anyway, we end up in the final that year against Huron with Eric Hall. And he and Mitch were teammates at USD, and we'd beaten Eric and his team at OG that year in an overtime. So really good games, but it was one of those times when all of a sudden, the coaches look at tape and, Stephen couldn't guard Eric Hall. Well, that ended up being a problem for us because they switched a bigger kid on to Stephen. Yeah. And so Stephen had to guard somebody else outside. So we were kind of in a mismatch problem. But it was a good game. Coach Budenhagen and I go way back. We had good visits over the years. And seeing his team this year progress, it didn't surprise me. Once they got healthy, their size was a problem. I mean, you saw them. I mean, they were big
and physicality
and physical, and they were good. And
absolutely.
To put your 6'10" kid on the perimeter because you got 3 other kids 6'7", 6'8", 6'8", that's kind of a good thing to have.
Yeah.
But good guy, just fun to coach against him. And then 2005 we ran at Mitchell.
Well, I was going to say, your memories. You knew this was it for you.
Yep.
This is your last game, your last chance to win a state title. Mitch's last game. What do you remember best about that?
Oh, it was a hard night, really hard night. Mitch and I talked about it because he remembers. I mean, and that particular tournament he had gotten a virus, and so he wasn't feeling as well as he would have liked. But he played good. We got to the final one, but I just remember a lot of, you think about all of the years that you coached, and I had announced it because I wanted, and people knew, I mean, they wanted, because I was already working at my other job, as you mentioned, but I was hoping that the kids would make it about, hey, this is about you guys. I'm done. You're going to have a new coach the next year. We're going to do the best we can. And they just played their tails off. I mean, we were probably not supposed to get to the final. There were a couple other good teams. Mitchell was in a similar deal, but they were, not overly big. We weren't either, but very quick and could get after people, and we could score points. I think we scored 93 against Michael Tweed and the Peer Governors that first round.
Michael Tweed went on to play North Dakota State.
Yeah, good, very good player. Yeah. But anyway, it was a fun year. I think we were 21-3. We finished whatever it was, but yeah, it was fun. I was blessed again to be able to coach a lot of good kids and coaching my own. People always ask who was the best player you coached, and I thought, I hate to, you don't want to single out your own kid, but Mitch was probably the best player I've ever coached, just from that things he could do. I mean, he could be a point guard, he could be an off guard. In fact, he played both positions, but he could rebound. And I had other good kids that could do those kind of things too, but he had just that kind of competitive desire to just whatever he had to do, he was going to do.
Yeah.
And Matt was very similar. Didn't quite have the number of good players around Matt at the time, but Mitch played as a freshman, and we were pretty competitive. So my last 4 years of coaching was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, I bet it was. I want to connect as we land the plane. I want to connect maybe the moments in the aftermath of the loss in your last game that you ever coached against Mitchell with Mitch, to when Mitch's first state title, who coincidentally they beat O'Gorman out in Rapid City, and the first moments you may have shared with him once they had won and celebrated there at Roosevelt.
Yeah, it was fun. I just remember I was standing up in the kind of underneath the balcony because it was like, I can't watch this. I was probably the biggest wreck emotionally that I was, because not only was he in the final, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got to, he's got a good chance here, but O'Gorman was really good.
Yeah.
And we had played him 2 other times earlier in the year and won really close games. I think one was by a point. Another one was by 1 or 2 points. I mean, that was their only 2 losses.
Were you thinking about all this going on that year, or was there a part of you that had a little PTSD from your coaching
a little
in
bit,
finals?
A little bit.
Okay.
I got to be honest. I mean, it was like, okay. I mean, it's almost to the point where I didn't want to go to the game.
Yeah.
And I've never felt that way. But anyway, as it progressed, and that one they ended up blowing them out.
Yeah.
And so I said, I've got to go down. I just couldn't wait to get down by the floor. I didn't want to go on the floor, but I got down by the floor, and my good friend Dave Dolan, who I officiated with, wanted me to come out and present the trophy. I said, no. I said, you do that. This is Mitch's time. I want to stand right here. And once the game was over, and I'll never forget, he made eye contact, and he comes over, and it was just, really cool feeling to have your son do something that not only the coaching part, but to get to that pinnacle of winning a state title and in the dominant fashion, because if you remember, they didn't have a close game. I think it was a 20-point game. I mean, still to this day, I don't remember very many tournaments, and I saw a lot of them where one team just pretty much dominated every game. And they were good. And the year before was the COVID year, and all those guys were on that team, and I'm not so sure they were the 3rd seed that year. So
wow.
I always wondered, if COVID didn't happen, how many, could he have won? You never know. I mean, there's always a lot of extenuating circumstances, but that was special. The next year, and Mitch knew they were going to be good.
Yeah,
in fact,
ran the table.
Yeah, Marcus Phillips, he was out in the locker room after his junior year when they won it. He said, he looks at Mitch and the guys, and we're going to do this again. And if you remember Marcus, 6'3" or 4 or 5, whatever he was.
Very strong pitcher at Tennessee.
Oh boy, I mean, you talk about a kid that he just had the it. I mean, whatever he did athletically, he was good at. I always wondered what he'd been like as a football player, but he's doing pretty well as a baseball player. But they were not going to be denied. That team was very, very special. They all played together since they were probably 5th grade, and that doesn't happen very often anymore, as you know. But that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that team a lot, and I enjoyed his other teams. I mean, leading up to this year, I really enjoyed this group of kids that he finished with. Glad they had a good finish, just because I knew Mitch was going to make that announcement. You don't want it to be a bad ending, and it wasn't a bad ending, obviously. They got, I think, where they needed to get to, short of a title, but they had a good finish, and I couldn't be more prouder of him and those kids.
As the guy who turned O'Gorman around for good and for the better part of 2 decades, what did you make of Derek Robey's run? Just continuing it. And
he did a fantastic job. I just remember, when I left, I knew there was good kids coming. We were loaded, and I knew that. And I told Coach Keeter, because we had talked about who was going to be the next coach, and there was a couple of really good candidates that I think would have, been good too. But Derek, I think he had the right temperament. The good thing was my coaching staff remained intact. He kept all those guys, and Steve Creer had been my teammate at Augie, and he had been my sophomore coach, and he had coached a lot of those kids when they were coming up through the elementary, junior high, and it was just a good idea to keep him close. And I think he was instrumental in helping Derek through those first couple of years, just to kind of get acclimated. Not that he couldn't have done it, but I don't think sometimes Steve gets the credit he deserves for being there and just kind of being that holdover. And because defensively there was no better coach. When he had the sophomores and got them ready, I told him, I said, I don't care what you do offensively, just get them ready for me to play defense at my level, and that's what he did. Okay. And so he was really good at that, and I'm glad he was able to kind of be a part of that. And we go a lot of connections over the years, and but Derek did a phenomenal job. I wish he could have finished a little better. I know he would have liked to, but hey, he had a great run.
Yeah, he was also known for taking those football players
and
turning those
absolutely.
into basketball teams. Did ever you see, you had a great career, obviously a very successful career after that. Did it ever, especially when state tournament time comes around, did it ever grate at you that you never got to hoist the trophy, or did you?
I kind of got past that. And I'll be honest. When Mitch won those two, that was like Coach Hoover even said. He says we finally got somebody in our coaching tree that has state titles. I mean, even he and Mitch talked quite a bit. I mean, I was surprised. He would call Mitch, and Mitch adored hearing from him.
Yeah.
And who wouldn't? I mean, Coach Hoover's 90+ years old and still sharp and still loves to talk basketball. And he would come to a few games. But yeah, it was special. And just seeing him do that, I mean, winning is great, but there are so many other things that you can take away from being able to coach and being able to be with players and enjoy people being around them is great.
Well, it's certainly applied. And you've mentioned this to your life after basketball with Sanford, because you were hired to do a lot of the skills that made you effective at that. And from a guy like Stu Whitney, who covered you, who just said you were one of his favorite coaches to talk to because you were mature and could handle it and talk like this after a loss, to guys who worked with you and for you at Sanford, who just said you were wonderful to work with because of your ability to mediate and to get people to come together and stuff like that. So it all checks out. It all makes sense.
I think coaches and teachers and people that have the skill set, and even in today's world, I mean, you can transition to a lot of things because, and I think teachers in particular, and not that I want them to leave education, but there's a lot of them that do, and I get a few calls from folks over the years. What made you decide? Were you afraid to do it? And I'll be honest, I mean, it's tough to step out of your box, especially when your comfort level is this, and now you're going to step into a whole new world. But I always tell people it's the best thing I ever did, and I would encourage anybody to do that because it just makes you think, it makes you get uncomfortable again, and I think being uncomfortable makes you better. And I always tell people that. I said, don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone because there are other things that you can do if you want to do that. And there are some great teachers who make it a lifelong deal. I name many of them. And several at Roosevelt that I've gotten to meet when Mitch has been there, some great teachers there, and some great teachers in Sioux Falls. And I just hope they do stay in it. I wish they could be taken care of a little bit better financially, but that's a whole nother story for a whole nother person. But anyway, I really have enjoyed this, John. And I enjoyed working with you out in Rapid
at those tournaments. It was a blast. You were natural at that. Again, you're just just casually, in a good way, just casually, just telling us what's going on, and it was a breeze. It was a blast, and so is this. I've always wanted to do this because of what just happened, all the great stories you have to tell. So thank you for making time to do this today.
Well, thank you for making time for me because it's, I really didn't have much going on. My calendar is pretty light.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we got more to talk about. It's obvious you're very in tune with the issues of youth sports and high school basketball and sports, and we'll do that another time.
That would be a whole other topic, and I've got a lot of suggestions, but that'll for another time. Okay. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Mike. Mike Begeman for video producer Cordell Wright, and for the folks at Gateway Lounge, happy hour and cheers.
You need anything else, John?
No, I think I'm good, Greg. I think I'm going to tap out.
All right. Have a good night.